Today I'm going to turn this 60s transistor radio into the ultimate practice amp. I'm going to blend vintage charm with killer analog tone. Hello people, Joe from Hello Sailor Effects here. Welcome to today's video. In today's video I'm going to show you how to turn a Roberts transistor radio into a solid state Ruby amplifier. I'm going to show you all the tips and tricks that I've picked up over the last 15 years of building guitar effects pedals, most of which have been at sea on board a warship. The goal of today's episode is to build a solid state amplifier that takes pedals as well as any tube amp. Of course, I'm going to be testing this amplifier with one of my range masters. Stick around to the end and you'll see how this amplifier sounds going straight into a Captain X being slammed by one of my range masters. Cheers. As ever, we've got my A4 piece of paper with all of our components on. Now, I absolutely messed up on this one. So being a clever guy that I am, I found this amazing deal on the LM386 on eBay. Authentic, not cheap Chinese copies. I was made up with myself, and then it turned up this little bitty tiny IC turned up. It is of course an SMD IC. Brilliant. Now, normally for comparison, this is the size of an IC. And this is the size of the one that I've got for this video. Fantastic. Now, of course, I have got a couple in stock that are full size. But I figured, do you know what? I'm going to build it with this one. Just to see if I can. Why not? I love a challenge. So we've got all of our components over here. I did indeed get this layout from Mark over on Tagboard Effects. He does like loads of cool Tagboard designs. If you're into this sort of thing, you've probably seen his work before. But I really like his layout. Funnily enough, I've just said again. I've just finished having a conversation with my mate Anjay, who runs just another guitar review channel, or just another guitar channel. Been subscribed for years. And he actually said to me, look mate, can I offer you a bit of advice? Take a breath, don't say And I was discussing, you know, how I'm not allowed to swear on these videos, whereas in the military I'm allowed to swear when I'm giving a briefing, so I kind of don't have to take that second breath to think, so I say Anyway, I advise you to give him a follow if you like. There I am again, going to do it all the way through the video. I advise you to give him a follow anyway. His channel is fantastic. If anyone wants this layout, please write in the comments, get in touch, and I will easily send you over a copy of it. Now, what you're going to need is this, a Roberts radio. Well, actually, you don't really need this. You can use any vintage radio or anything with a speaker in. Any speaker will do. These ones, I take the components out of, and you get some old Myriad transistors and whatnot, and make them into pedals. So, if you want to see how I do that, there's a video linked above. Also, this is the control panel. So the control panel is usually see-through, and it has some other bits on it for the radio. I've stripped all that off, put some decals on it, and then spray painted it pink, and that'll be our amplifier faceplate. We'll have an on-off switch and volume and gain. So this comes with, I mean, the good thing is the speaker inside here is an old Rola speaker, so we know everything old sounds good, right? So it's got to sound good. I advise getting yourself a nice old radio. It could be anything. Look on eBay, there's hundreds of them. You might be able to pilfer some of the components required for this amp too. That would be cool. And if anyone does that, by the way, please be sure to let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what stuff you're going to turn into this amplifier. Now, without further ado, let's get cracking on the Tagboard. The first issue I'm going to have is the IC, so I'm going to start with that first. And as you can see, it is minuscule. I mean, look at that. It's ridiculous. So, which way round does it go? There's no dot on this IC to show me which way round it goes. I'm an old school through hole guy. There's a dot on every IC. Issues. Now, on the pictures of an LM386 online, it shows that the dot is on the left-hand side when the writing is the correct way round. So I'm thinking that the line on this equals a dot. Don't know. If you know the answer, please tell me in the comments. I'm just guessing, completely guessing, but we're going to go with that. Now, for the legs of this, I'm going to use my hook and loop method that I use on all of my connections to get a good mechanical connection. I'm just going to solder them straight on there. Obviously, I might damage the IC, and there's a very good chance that I'm just going to use this this socket and buy some LM386s. In fact, I've probably got some in the drawer somewhere for look. Buy some or whatever and fit a regular size one in here instead of this minuscule thing. But I want to have a crack at it. Why not? Okay, so after 10 minutes of trying, I've absolutely come to the realization there is no way I'm using that miniature IC. Life's too short. I'm just not doing it. So onto using the socket we go. It took exactly 3 seconds to be able to solder the extensions onto the socket. I'm going to go ahead now and mount the socket to my tagboard. 2 of the connections that you can see on the drawing have other components going into them, so I won't solder them, but I will solder the rest. So when mounting these, I like to mount the 2 center pins, or the 2 end pins, into the center lugs and kind of leave it like this, and then I can simply bend these legs to meet these lugs so you get a nice right angle and it looks good. But you can kind of fit them however you like, as long as each pin is going to its correct tag on the tagboard. It really doesn't matter. There we have our IC socket all soldered in. Next I'm going to start moving from the left hand side to the right hand side, as I ever do, mainly because that's how my brain works, it's how we read. So I'm going to go that way. I'm going to start off with this 100 UF cap. Now I've gone electrolytic. You can go non-polar if you like, but I'm using a polar and it's a polar on the diagram. I advise to use an axial one that's lying down, but I've only got a vertical cap, so this is what I'm going to go with. Next I'm going to move on to an odd value resistor, which is 3.9k. Don't tend to come across them too much in guitar pedals. I've got a carbon comp, an old carbon comp for this one. If you can't find a 3.9k, you can in fact use other values and then wire them or solder them in series. So if I solder, for example, this resistor to this resistor to this resistor, then add all the values up and you get your end value. For example, if you had a 2.7k and then a 1.2k, you could wire them together and that'll get you closer to the value, you know, and so on and so forth. I'm rambling a little bit now. Without further ado, we are indeed going to go ahead and fit this. When I do fit this, I'm not going to solder in this tag here. So I'll solder in this tag, but I won't solder in this tag because our first 47NF cap goes into this one. The amount of times that I've soldered the component in and then realised that another component has to go into the same tag is countless. And it's a pain in the backside, so always be mindful of what's coming next. This is the 47NF cap I'm using. I'm almost out of these TCC caps. Bit of a shame really, because they're lovely caps. If anyone knows where I can get some, please write it in the comments. I'd definitely love to get a line on these caps again. There we go. So to fit this, I'm going to slot it through the lug here that has nothing in and bring it right the way to the end so it's flush up against the lug. Then snip this leg off as close to the lug that we're going in with our 3.9k resistor, and then when I slot it in and center it, there we go, it fits in. In case anyone was wondering how I fit capacitors to a board, I'm not sure if I've shown that before, but there you go. Then of course we wet the tip with a bit of solder tip cleaner. Great tip that. Thank you Stu from Tate Effects. I'd have been lost with all that. And we can of course solder both ends of this. I should have checked first. Yes, there you go, not following my own advice there. And there we have it. The next component is a 1.5 meg resistor. Now of course I don't have a 1.5 meg resistor. I've got a 1 meg resistor and a 470k resistor, which for me is close enough for government work, as we say in the military. To fit these two together, I can either put them together, butterfly tie them like I've said in previous ones and solder it and run it like a stand-up component, or you can lie them side by side, solder the two legs together, run some heat shrink over it and run it as an axial component. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to do it this way round for this one, just because we've got the space inside the box for things to be taller because it's going inside the old radio enclosure. Now I know I've said this before, when you're tying two components together, try not to snip it too close to where the components meet. I've done it in the past. You want to make it look neat, so you don't want this tag hanging off the top. But if you snip it too close, the two components will simply just fall apart. There won't be enough material holding them together, and then it just won't work. So better to have the little tag hanging out the top than it not work at all. And if it really bothers you, just put a bit of heat shrink over the top and you won't see it. Next on the list is this 100 NF cap. Now I've only got these really large ones, which is a bit of a pain because it won't fit into the lugs that it needs to go. So I'm going to go ahead and solder this in, and then I'm going to fit this going into the center holes of the lugs where I want it to go, so it does indeed attach to where it needs to be, but not through the regular method. And this is it with the 100 NF resistor fitted. As you can see, it's going into the center holes in the lugs, which is basically the same thing. As with the last electrolytic cap, I've got another vertical cap because I don't often use 220 UF capacitors in my pedals. This is a rather large one. I think actually my mate Teddy Plank gave me a bag of these from years ago. I got him building amplifiers, and he bought a load of components off eBay, and there's a bag of these he gave me them. So they are coming in use. Thank you, Teddy. I'm going to fit this going across these lugs now. The last resistor we're going to fit today is a 10 ohm resistor, real small resistor, and it goes into the bottom leg, or the positive leg of our 220 UF cap. Goes straight across the lug opposite. The last component to fit to the board is the JFET. Now this circuit asks for, or should have, an MPF 102. I don't have MPF 102s, I don't use them really, and they're getting quite hard to get hold of, so I'm going to use a J113. You could use a J201 or a 5458 maybe, but I'm going to use a J113. While we're talking about that, actually, the J113 there has got the same pin out as the MPF 102, so you don't even need to think about the pin out. Bargain. Now that that's fitted, it's time to fit all of the ground wires and connections. So for example, there's several in this row here that are going to be connected to ground. So I'm just going to run a wire, maybe underneath the board actually, and go from these center lug positions under the board, and I'm just going to loop them together for the ones that are going to be linked to earth. So I only have to run one earth cable. Likewise, we've got two live connections. The 9 volt goes to here, and it also goes over to here. So I'm just going to link them two together, so I only have to run one 9 volts. And there is another link, I believe it's from here to here. Yep, from there to there is another link. I'm going to run that one on the top, just so then it doesn't get confused with all the other stuff I'm doing. You could run them all on the top, you could run them all underneath, it doesn't really matter. But I do advise that if there's plenty of the tags linked together, I would run it before you fit it into the cab, and before you start running all the other wires, so it doesn't get confusion. There we have our earth wires run under the board. I'm going to go ahead and fit a little link for our two 9 volt connections. Now that all of our underboard connections are fitted, I'm going to go ahead and fit the one connection that's on the top of the board, which is going to connect this tag here through to this tag here. Simply just measure my wire out and give it a little bit extra. Skin the two ends. Skin the two ends, is that actually a saying? Give it a twist. And then obviously wet the tip and tin it. Well, hey, wet the tip, got to get that in there. It's almost a signature of my rhetoric on these episodes. So once I've got that, I am just going to heat up the center lug where it's going in, because it's already got some solder on, and then bend the wire around and just place it into the end, if I can get it in there, well done Joe, into the end of the other lug that it's going into, and then just give that a solder in there, and then that is it, finished. There's our board fully complete. All that's left now to do is to install it and then wire it all up. Before we move on to the next part of today's build, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who subscribed to my channel thus far. It's been insane how much I've grown in the last month. If you're getting value from my videos, please subscribe. It helps the algorithm see that people get value from my videos, and then it'll show it to more people. Thank you. This is going to be our faceplate. We're going to have the center position here is going to be a switch to isolate the battery, which will be mounted on one of these. So I'll either disconnect the live, go into the circuit, just give it an open circuit. I'll wire that into that position. And then we're going to have our gain and volumes. Now, because this is going to be upside down and these will be fitted, I won't be able to see what value pot is what when I'm wiring it up. Now, you could wire it on your workbench now. I could give myself enough wire them in, and then just attach it. Fine, that would be nice and easy. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to write on the bottom of these pots what each one is. I'm going to install them, install this into the cab, install that into the cab, and then run the wires afterwards, just so then I can make them neat and run them around the perimeter of the cab. Now, first of all, our 10K B, which is linear, is our volume pot. So I'll give that a V on the bottom. And then our 1K B linear is our gain pot. So I'll give that a good G on the bottom. Now I know which way round I'm going to wire them in once it's all fitted. Another note, I'm actually going to install these pots now on the back of this. To install them, the washers that come with these pots are going to be too small for the holes in this perspex, because the pots fitted to these old radios with a larger style. You could buy larger pots, but I'm not going to do that. I do want to use these. So we've got to use a larger washer. Also, these have a little locating pin, because some enclosures have like a locking pin, so then that's locked in place. This will not have them. I mean, you could drill it in there if you wanted, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to remove them bits, and then I'm going to go ahead and attach them. Now, when I attach them to the bottom here, I'm going to face them backwards, because these lugs will point towards the back door of our cab, which means that I've got access to them. Here we have a larger washer, and then our normal washer, and then the nut goes on top, just in case anyone was wondering. Of course, I don't have the correct switch, so I've got a 3-pole double throw switch, and I'm really only going to use 1 pole of it. In fact, I might switch the earth as well, just because I've got the lugs available. This is an on switch. If you get an on switch, you'll have a center position. You really don't want that for this operation, because it is just an on and off switch for your amplifier. Now, these come with washers that have this little tab on them. Now, that little tab allows it to hook into whatever it's being fitted to stop the switch from moving around. Now, obviously, we don't have a space like before for the pots for this, so I am just going to clip that off and use it as it is. I'm sure there's going to be lots of hate about that, but there you go. There's our switch fitted. One other thing that I negated to put in is, firstly, an LED space. So I'm going to have to drill a hole approximately about here to fit an on-off LED, which of course we've got the lugs on our switch available to be able to fit. And also I'm going to have to drill a hole in each of these 4 corners, so then I can screw this into the enclosure, because it was previously glued in or pressed in by the other components in there. Not very well. I wanted to just sit there freestanding, holding all of our controls. So I'm going to drill a hole in each corner and just use self-tapping screws and screw it in there. The tag board's now inside the enclosure. I've went ahead and fitted my top panel. We've got our on-off switch here, volume and gain, and LED. And if we spin it round to the back, the 2 jacks. One's going to be our input jack, and the other is going to be for an external speaker. Now, you can have it so this external speaker defeats the speaker in here, but I'm not going to, because I want to run this along with another speaker the same size and have 2 speakers together sometimes. But this is completely up to you how you wire it up. Now, if we look inside, we have our tag board down here. Over here we have our battery housing and our old Rola speaker ready to go. Next, I'm going to wire up the battery housing onto the switch. I'm going to wire up both the positive and the negative, because I've got a 3-pole double throw switch. I can wire up both positive and negative, so when we switch the switch off, it disconnects both sides. You don't really need to do that. You could just do the live or the negative. There we have our 2 wires coming from the battery snap down, running around here. I've put a bit of heat shrink on there, no other reason than I just like it. I've made sure that the live is on this side of the switch and the negative on this side, and that is just because when the live comes out the top here to go to the circuit, I'm also going to run a resistor over here to the live side of this LED, just so then the LED is switched And then the negative side of this will come out and go to the circuit, but it will also go to both of these pots, which also take a negative. And then I'll take from the pots the negative down to the speaker, or maybe I'll come from this down to the speaker and then out to these jacks. But first of all, let's wire in our positive side of this to the circuit. So our live wire is now set up. It's coming from this part of the switch here, round the outside of the casing and to one of the 2 points on the tag board where live is connected. If you remember earlier on in the video, we connected them together. So I've just gone from the outside of this JFET, run it round. I've also run a 10k resistor to the live side of my LED. Now I get asked quite a lot, what type or what value resistor should we use for this position? When I first started building effects pedals, it was widely promulgated that you use a 1k resistor, then a 2.2k resistor. And actually what I've found is that they are really too bright for what I like, but it's a preference thing. So I go with 10k now. Sometimes I'll go a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. And I have seen some builders use a pot to change the resistance of this. So you can have like a dimmer switch on there. More power to you. It's not something I've done here though. I have just gone for a 10k. Next step is going to be to wire up the earth, which is a bit of a challenge. So our earth lugs are going to be lug 1 on both of our pots. This lug here is going to be the earth for our circuit down here. Also, we want to add in an earth for our jacks, which are of course on the back plate. I'm going to do them last. Right now I'm going to run a bar, or just like a solid piece of wire from this lug to this lug, and that'll give me a staging post where I can connect this to it, and I can also connect a wire coming from the circuit to it too. And then that way I've got a solid earth, and also not to forget the speaker, so I can get them all wired into one bus bar, if you like. Now it's time to wire up the speaker, or at least add the earth to the speaker, the negative side. And the easiest way to do this, if you have an old speaker with no markings on, is to take your battery, place the negative terminal on one side and a positive terminal on the other side, and watch the speaker itself, the cone. If the cone goes forward, then that means you've got it the right way round, and the positive is the positive and the negative is the negative. Or if the cone comes backwards, it means you've got them mixed up. So for this one here, we can see that the cone goes forward if I have the negative on this side and a positive on that side. But if I change this over, you can see the cone comes backwards. So one more check. There you go. The top one here is the positive and the bottom one here is the negative, and that's because the cone goes forward. Little handy top tip from Joe. Again, this is an opportunity for you all to learn from my mistakes. I haven't been looking at the schematic while I've been wiring this up, which is a massive mistake to start. So the gain pot does not actually have an earth to it. It just goes to 2 points of the circuit, which is here and here. So I'm going to clip this out and clip this off here, so that then I'm not adding an earth to this that doesn't need to be there. So before I go and wire that gain pot in wrong, let's get this out the way. And now that that's out the way, let's snip this off, because we've got all the earth wires we need, and remove that. There you go. Now the gain pot does in fact have 2 connections to it. One of them, which is gain pot 1, goes to here, and gain pot 2 here and 3 joined together. You could just do 2, but on the schematic I've got, it joins them together, so I just will. That goes to the next one along. So I'm going to wire them in now. It's another example of where I jump the gun and don't look at what I'm doing. That's our gain pot now wired into these 2 connections here onto the board. Next, I'm going to wire up my volume pot, and that comes from this next connection along here, which goes to the center lug of the volume pot. And then there's also a connection right here on the end of this 47NF cap, which is our input cap, that goes through to this connection on the volume pot. Of course, I will make this schematic available to anyone. If anyone wants it, please write in a comment and I will get it to you. Right, now let's get it wired in. Now I'm going to move on to wiring up our 2 jacks. This bottom one's going to be the input jack, and the top one is going to be our extra speaker jack. I've run this extra earth cable off of our connection here, so that's going to connect to both of them. I'm just going to wire it into that one and then run it down to that one next. Now we have that wired in. Next stage is going to be to wire up the live signal coming from our input, and that's this lug here. And I'm going to follow the same wire path as this wire as I do for all of mine, remembering that how you wire something up is kind of like your signature. So anyone just starting out, please try and wire it the way that you're going to go forward. And because now, I mean, I've just got back one of my very first pedals. I think it was like the third one that I ever made, and looking inside that is like looking at a car crash. It's horrific. I'm glad I got it back, and the guy who owned it is the guy who bought it from me originally. Very graciously swapped me for a new pedal, so I'm made up, but looking inside that thing is horrific. So I'm going to wire it up from there. We're going to go round and follow our same wire path. I'm going to go to the input, which is down here on this leg of the JFET. Now we have that wired up. Next stage is to wire up the live signal to our speaker. Now, on our drawing, the output is from this 220 NF capacitor, so it's just going to go straight to the speaker lug here. But I'm also going to run a wire from the same tag on a tag board round to here to our jack, so then I can plug in an external speaker cab. My thinking is that I could probably plug in another one of these same radios and stack them on top of each other and have two small speakers as my practicing amp. That is our whole circuit wired in. Next, you should test it, and I do advise everyone to test it, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go straight ahead and put 1,000 cable ties in there, so then it looks good, and it also annoys my father-in-law Glyn, who hates me doing that. Here's another valuable lesson. I have actually now cable tied everything in and went to do a sound test, and of course nothing worked because of this. I hadn't actually fitted the Opamp. I say it every single time, I always forget something like this. So I'm going to go ahead now, fit the Opamp into our socket, and then we'll move on. Well, that concludes today's Ruby amplifier build. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and if anyone decides to build one of these amplifiers, I'd love to hear about it down in the comments. I want to know how you get on and what you chose to build your amplifier in. Now, for the sound test, I'm going to be using the Captain X, just like I do with all my other videos. That means that you get to hear it in comparison or context to everything else that I've filmed so far. You'll get to hear it up against one of my range masters. First you'll hear it in germanium mode, and then I flick it down to silicon mode, so you get a feel for how it reacts to both types of transistors. Now without further ado, onto the sound sample.